long time ago. When the decision was made not to pursue a residual force in Iraq, that began a train of events which now leads us to where we are today, in a situation where we have to select from a group of bad options.
America is once again at the doorstep of military action in the Middle East, once again preparing to fight a mobile enemy that in almost every sense of the word defies what standard military strategy is prepared for. What should America be doing to prepare? And how should we be fighting against terrorists who run and hide at every turn? Joining us now, senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, former member of the Israeli Army, and author of several books on combating jihadism. Welcome, Barak Mendelsohn, to MidPoint. Barak, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I will have to ask you, before we start getting a little bit to strategy here, to comment on some of the things that the president said within the last hour, where he talked about action in the Middle East. The one thing that caught everybody's attention here is that he did not put his full support behind Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, basically saying if it's you or somebody else who is in control, we will be there to help. When you hear something like that, does that immediately tell you that the United States has recognized that Maliki is one of, if not the biggest problems in this instance?
Clearly, they see al-Maliki as one of the main obstacles in Iraq. I'm not sure that his removal will solve the problem, but it doesn't seem that he's willing or capable at this point to create an inclusive Iraq. And without an inclusive Iraq, it's going to be very hard to keep that country together and to stop the fighting.
When we talk about an inclusive Iraq, something else the president said, he talked about Iraq, in American parlance here, getting your act together, having national unity meetings. The leaders must rise above their differences and have a political plan. Barak, isn't that just a pipe dream more than anything else in what Iraq and what many governments in the Middle East have become?
It's absolutely a pipe dream. I wouldn't expect an American president not to say that. And I think that the president is right, that if you want a solution in Iraq and peaceful Iraq, this is what you need to have. But this is not going to happen.
Let's give it then to you from this side, knowing the region as you do, and knowing a lot of, we talk Sunnis and Shiites, and we talk all these different factions right now. We've talked about airstrikes, putting advisors on the ground, trying to train this security force and this military. In your opinion, is any of that going to work?
Well, in my opinion, the president wanted to be seen as if the U.S. is doing something significant without committing the U.S. too much, especially not for a course of action where it knows that it needs other partners that are unlikely to be willing to go along. But since the president is being attacked and criticized for the events in Iraq, he needs to at least show that the U.S. is serious and is trying to take action.
Knowing how things work in the Middle East with these governments, would you have any trepidation about saying that sooner or later, if America really wants to clean up what's in Iraq, that they will have to go back in again militarily?
I don't think that the U.S. can clean up Iraq. The U.S. is the strongest country on earth now, but it's not all powerful. And the dynamics within Iraq are much more complicated. And the U.S. force, the U.S. can take control, it can conquer territory. But once it gets to the next phase, it's going to get lost again. So it doesn't seem to me like a very useful option. I wish that going back in full force would really help, but we have the experience. There are so many actors participating here, and to assume that they will all play along or that American power alone will be enough to get everybody to do the right thing, that would be a pipe dream too.
All right, now you talked about so many actors. Let's get down to some of these actors here in the Middle East right now, and certainly in this area. Let us start with the one that everybody knows, and that is the Taliban. We have the Taliban, we have Pakistan getting involved, we have them as a haven for many of these terrorists. How instrumental do you think that the Taliban is at this moment, and that they could be as things start to destabilize?
I don't think that the Taliban is very important for the events in Iraq. There is so much such a mess in the Middle East that you have so many other better positioned safe havens that you really don't need the Taliban trapped in Pakistan. It's so far away. You have so many better positions inside Syria, in Sinai, in Libya, that are just so much better positioned, that there are such better locations that really you don't need to worry that much about the Taliban. There are lots of other bad locations.
Okay, Taliban, let's take them out of this for the time being. Let us move on to ISIS, which in many Americans' parlance, they didn't know about more than a couple of weeks ago. Nobody knew what they were and who they were. But let me ask you, because as someone who knows the region and who understands what goes on there, how long has ISIS been a factor and how long has it been growing? Because certainly it seems to Americans that we missed the boat on this and we weren't ready for them.
The U.S. obviously was not ready for ISIS. If we go back in years, ISIS, the origins of ISIS is with the group of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in Iraq. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, Al-Qaeda didn't have presence in Iraq, but there were other jihadis, and the main guy was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and he established his jihadi group, Al-Tawhid wal-Jihad. Later, that group joined Al-Qaeda, even though they had significant differences over time. In the next incarnation, it became the Islamic State of Iraq. The Islamic State of Iraq overreached. It was defeated by local actors, by the Sahwa, the awakening groups that were an alliance of tribal forces, Sunni tribal forces that got the support of the US, and the Islamic State of Iraq was defeated. But since the grievances of the Sunni minority in Iraq were not resolved during that time, ISIS was able to make a comeback. 2010 was probably its lowest point, but there is such a strong basis for grievances in Iraq, and the situation in Syria played into its hands that it was able to rebuild its power and really make a comeback. It got the name ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Asham, which is Greater Syria, in April 2013, when the leader of ISIS formally announced that the group is expanding into Syria and is now going to be renamed the Islamic State of Iraq and Asham.
All right, now here comes the key with you as a strategist. We're talking about potentially having advisors and trainers again on the ground in the Middle East. There is discussion about airstrikes, which will take time. This is a very mobile fighting force. This is a force that scatters. This is not as if they march or command themselves like any military that we would know, standard military. How do you fight these guys?
It's hard to fight these guys, but they can't fight the same way that they did a few weeks ago. As they gain more territory, they have to fight more like a regular army. They are never going to be exactly a regular army, but they're better targets now because they have to move in larger groups. So at least in this regard, I think that they have to defend much larger territory, and it's easier, especially since they're on the offensive, it's easier to identify them and target them. But I believe that the main actors to do that are the Iraqi forces, and there are enough Iraqi forces that are both strong, maybe not the forces in Mosul, but the forces of the Iraqi military around Baghdad are much more prepared, are definitely now on alert, and they are joined by very powerful Shiite militias, and of course Iranian forces and Iranian advisors that are going to be a lot more effective than if the U.S. will try to do something in Iraq.
You just brought in the four-letter word that many people are talking about, and that is Iran. And again, your experience in the region, knowing the groups, knowing the players on this chessboard, would you ever suggest the United States trust Iran and work with them?
I don't think that the U.S. would be, it won't be wise to trust Iran. There are definitely points of converging interests, and the U.S. should exploit those points. What I'm disturbed about the way that the narrative of Iran in Iraq is playing is the suggestion that the U.S. needs Iran more than Iran needs the U.S. What's going on in Iraq now is a much more significant threat to Iranian interest in the region than to American interest. The U.S. does not need to make compromises on the nuclear issue to get Iran to act in promotion of U.S. interests in Iraq. It needs to be the other way around. Iran needs the U.S. and American assistance much more here. Clearly, you can't trust them, but the U.S. had to engage with lots of other actors that it couldn't trust in the past. You find ways to verify. You're very careful with the way that you cooperate, but cooperation between enemies is not unusual.
15 seconds I have left here. Can Iraq be saved without American assistance?
I think that Iraq can be saved without American assistance. If Iraq can be saved, it's probably going to be better to have that without American assistance. American assistance can come only later after there is willingness from the actors within Iraq to actually play nice.
We have come right down to it once again. It is full circle. A willingness of the actors inside Iraq to basically take care of it. I think you hit it right on the head. Barak Mendelsohn, thank you so much for joining us. Your insight is wonderful. We will do this again. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, it comes down to this. The president said it in his statement as well, where he talked about national unity meetings, but he said the leaders in Iraq must rise above their differences and have a political plan. Is there a plan? You'll tell us, of course, on social media as you respond via Twitter, email, and Facebook, and we'll talk about it right here on MidPoint, where we question everything.